the NFL Combine, including I think it was like there was like a couple like almost there was double digit Huskies. I want to say it was like close to 15 Huskies in
A lot of
attendance.
UW players, yeah.
And this is, I've been waiting for this moment to talk about Jack Westover, assuming that I would have a chance to talk about some measurements. And he shows up with an injury, could not work out, did, I think interviews and stuff like that. I want to say a thing about Jack Westover that we never said because we were kind of in the fog of sadness about the national championship loss.
Yeah.
There was a play in that game. He had like really clutch catches all down the end of the season and throughout the year, and he's obviously shown like athletic ability. But there was a play where he ran down a would-be, I think, pick six. And in that moment, I was like, that dude is gonna get some run on an NFL team, whether it's special teams or whatever. Like that guy, he is not an NFL prospect by production. What he did with the Huskies does not scream a dude who's like definitely, but he's a guy who's like a tight end, big body, is going to be able to play special teams, and is going to play hard. Is he going to be a guy that catches 700 balls in his career? Almost certainly not. But will he be a guy that probably gets like 5 or 6 years? Could he be a special teams / third tight end, whatever? I think that dude's going to play in the NFL.
It's funny that you didn't like the draft pick of Will Dissly, but you really like Jack Westover, because to me they're like very similar.
Oh,
guys.
I think they're so different. I
think
Dissly's
they
a
have different
blocking
skill sets, but when you think about just the type of guy that they seem similar.
I think
to
you're
me.
just racially profiling these guys. It's just like one
Yeah,
tight end
I see
versus
I
another
see
white
a big
tight end.
white tight end, and I'm like, yeah, that's the same guy.
To me, this is like saying, what was the dude? It's not Zach Wilson. What was the dude that the Zach Thomas what was the fucking Zach?
Zach Miller. You're thinking
Zach
of Zach
Miller. God, there were two Zach Millers
Yeah.
at some point. Anyways,
There was two Zach Millers.
that's
Both
like
tight
saying
ends. Very
Zach Miller
confusing.
and Chris Cooley were the same player because they were both white tight ends. Like these are very
I like
different
to
guys.
do. You know how like ESPN personalities, they always get made fun of, or they kind of get dragged when they do the lazy comparison of like,
Like when they
two
called
black
it-
quarterbacks. Yeah, it's
like Dwayne Haskins would get called a scrambler at points in his
right,
career.
right. Stephen A. Smith, yeah, he labeled
Yeah.
Dwayne Haskins a running quarterback because he just assumed looking at him. I do that
Yeah.
with white tight ends. I'm like, I
Good.
just assume. Yeah.
No,
It's,
Westover's
that's the way to go.
Westover, I think, has like high upside and probably, but that's my point is like, he's not a wasted roster spot, which I think is good when you're the guy who's like on the verge of being the 53rd guy on a roster.
Right.
A guy that can play special teams will beat out a guy that can't play special teams. So I think he'll stick around for a while.
This is relevant, kind of. It doesn't really like accelerate your point. But a lot of my combine info is from like my buddies who have to go cover the combine.
Sure.
And then they spend all day bitching on our chat thread about things that happen. So I'm going to out what happened here. So Jack Westover shows up to the combine with this injured hand. And of course, nobody knew coming in he had an injured hand. I mean, you haven't seen this guy since the national championship, and he was
Right.
fine then. So obviously showing up to the combine with a busted hand is a big deal, because everyone expected this guy to perform, and now he can't really perform because he's got this injury. So he's really just there to answer questions from teams and the media, right? That's about it. So he gets up on the podium with a very visibly injured hand. And apparently one of the guys in the media scrum, instead of asking the obvious question first, which would be like, hey, buddy, what happened to your hand? And are you going to be able to like produce here? He started asking about all sorts of stupid shit that didn't matter. Basically,
Like what?
overtook the entire, just about like random things about like the championship and stuff like that. Kind of overtook the whole scrum with like this series of questions that really, it didn't address the elephant in the room, which was the injury to this guy, which should have been everybody's first question. I always just find it funny, like just hearing media like kind of talk about how these things go, and it's always interesting to me to see how people can like totally screw up a line of questioning. I'm sure we would we would be the guys doing the same thing, like not
Man,
notice
that's kind
that
of my
this guy's
dream
arm
is to
fell
be
off or something.
Yeah, my dream is to be the guy asking horrible questions for laughs later, like for just our folks.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, anyways, the combine, I want to talk about a couple different things there because I watched an embarrassing amount of the combine, and which is just like, by the way, if you spend 30 minutes watching the combine, I think that qualifies as an embarrassing amount because you're watching guys play football with no defense, right? So I watched the quarterback drills. I just wanted to hear what people were saying about Michael Penix. I also wanted to see JJ McCarthy because you see these guys. I'm not out here grinding tape. Like, that's not the kind of draft fan that I am, right? I want to see that guy throw a ball and then see another college quarterback that's an NFL prospect throw a ball. Because I think you can see, like, and I will say my worries about JJ McCarthy becoming a Seahawk are pretty much assuaged. I think he's going to be a pretty good NFL quarterback. Michael Penix is like the talk of the quarterback workouts, which is good. This is like, I think you, or at least me, and maybe you, thought that would be the case. Like, I thought at some point he would be a very good prospect in this process, and I think he's going to be very good. He didn't work out any other way, which is a little bit frustrating. This was like the theme of the quarterbacks, is only a couple of them took, only a couple of them ran the 40, only a couple of them did the drills, the other drills, and that's frustrating. He's more mobile than people give him credit for. I was reading scouting reports that said he's a statue because he wasn't putting up crazy numbers. And anyway, that I think Penix. Would you be happy with the Seahawks drafting Penix at 16? Is ultimately my question.
Yes, I would. Yeah, I definitely would. I like Michael Penix. I don't know that. The problem with liking what would happen versus what I think is actually going to happen is usually with the Seahawks, those two things are so far off. Whatever people want to happen and what the Seahawks actually want to do, they are nowhere near each other. They're two ships passing in the night. And I think when it comes to Michael Penix, there's obviously local fans are going to want. Yeah, I think even like Coug fans could get over the fact that this is a UW legend and be like, hey, this is a really good quarterback. Because when you watch Michael Penix throw a football, it's just amazing. But I also used to think the same things about, I remember watching Robert Griffin throw a football, and I was like, man, this guy is going to be an incredible NFL quarterback. And then injuries caught up with him. I remember watching Geno Smith in college. Speaking of another guy who's a Seahawk right now, Geno Smith threw an amazing ball in college too, and he still throws a pretty good ball. But it's the type of thing where, like, when you get to a certain point at the next level, maybe it's just the coaches you have, maybe it's the scheme you're running. Things are different. Obviously, this would be a dream scenario for Penix and probably for a lot of Seahawks fans because he would be working with the same coordinator he had all through college that made him as good as he is. So, yeah, I would love it if they drafted Michael Penix. Do I think they're going to? No, especially because they just cut two presumable defensive starters, for one thing, today, and then they have a lot of other needs. I mean, they have a need at tight end. They have a need in a couple different places on the defensive side of the ball. You could argue they still have needs on the offensive line because of the injuries that they've had there. So there are a lot of holes to fill. Technically, quarterback isn't one of those. Do I think it's a good idea when you have, a veteran quarterback like Geno Smith at the end of his contract? Yeah, I think it's a good idea because then you can redshirt this guy that you draft. So
right.
I hope they pick him. I don't think they will, but regardless of where Penix ends up, I feel like he's going to be a good NFL quarterback.
Yeah, I think it's like I have a decent. This is the thing I'm a little bit obsessed with the draft is specifically quarterbacks, which I'm certainly not the only one. I will say the year Robert Griffin came out, I did not want Robert Griffin. I was a Kirk Cousins guy, which it's weird how Kirk Cousins' career has been this roller coaster of people thinking he was a pile of shit and great, like at different points. But it's
very much like Joe Flacco. It's like Joe Flacco, where like year to year he's good or bad. It kind of changes all the time.
Yeah, and it's like he's pretty much been the same player the whole time. I was big on Andrew Luck. I was actually really upset when the Seahawks drafted Russell Wilson. I thought he was had potential to be very good, felt like a big risk. I wanted Cousins there. I don't know what the Seahawks look like if Cousins gets drafted there. I don't know what Cousins looks like if Cousins gets drafted there. But I have strong feelings that Michael Penix is going to be a quality NFL quarterback. I'll say this. This is my bold proclamation. I think that Michael Penix is going to make a Pro Bowl in his career. A Pro Bowl. I'm not calling him like a future, like he's not a Hall of Fame. I think Rome Odunze is going to be a Hall of Famer in the NFL. He worked out well.
That's lofty. He's very good. I mean,
I know.
Saying he could be a Hall of Famer is quite
It's
the
intentionally
praise.
bold. I think that dude, one, has all the physical traits you want out of a receiver, runs good routes for the size he is. But when you listen to him in interviews, you listen to Michael Penix in interviews, and it's obvious that he's a smart dude. It's obvious that he's a thoughtful guy, and he's got perseverance and all these things that you want out of a player. When you listen to Rome Odunze and you hear the reports of Odunze was like he wanted to get a specific, like, break a specific threshold on like the 3-cone drill or some shit like that, where you're like, oh, this dude is out there. I've consumed so much good and bad draft content in the last couple days. Odunze feels like a guy who's like really gonna put in the work to be a great, and he's already great. He's already that the contested catch percentage is insane. That's like unheard of production. He's one of these guys that's like open when I've heard the comparison I heard that I actually liked on Michael Penix, the easy, lazy comparison for you. Well, you would do it on racial lines, so maybe not, but is Tua Tagovailoa. That's the big
Because he's a lefty.
because he's a lefty, right? I heard Steve Young as a comparison, and they go without the mobility. And but
then it's not Steve Young.
Steve Young. Well, first off, he has more mobility than people think. I think we're going to see that on his pro day if he runs. We're going to see that he has more mobility than people think.
Stephen A. Smith already has him as a scrambler, so
Had him as a scrambler out of the womb, it turns out. But
no, but Steve Young, yeah, he ran a lot early in his career, and Penix doesn't really. Penix runs when he has to, but he is quicker. He's quicker than you think. It's kind of like what Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers used to always be like. He ran when he had to, and when he ran, he was a lot quicker than you would think. Brock Purdy does it today a lot. It's like when the guy has to run, he runs for like 20 yards, and you're like, that's a pretty good scramble.
Yeah. I think there's not going to be a lot of designed runs for Michael Penix, which maybe I suspect back in these are like old school. I mean, Steve Young is like old school West Coast offense quarterback. They wanted mobility, but not necessarily a scrambler. They wanted mobility behind the line of scrimmage, inside the pocket, etc. So that was like, I thought that was an interesting comparison for like young Steve Young as a prospect. They're not saying he's going to become a Hall of Fame quarterback, but that he was a comparable prospect. This guy who's just a prolific passer with some mobility, and then of course left-handed is a big part of that.
Yeah, the interesting thing about just drafting a quarterback as a whole in the NFL, man, it's so much more than talent with these guys. It's a lot of it is just personality based. That's why I think the combine for a lot of these players plays such a huge role, because you get a chance to meet with all the teams, all the front office personnel, and you have to imagine that the Seahawks and Penix would have a personality that fits. He didn't even meet with the Seahawks when he was at the combine, and people that kind of raised some eyebrows, but you would have to think they know everything they need to know about Penix already because of the connection he has to Ryan Grubb. So why waste your time? Why waste anyone's time talking to this guy if he's talked to everybody there already? I mean, maybe he hasn't talked to a guy like Mike McDonald. I'm guessing he's probably had some connection with John Schneider in the past. But he's probably going to be a good personality fit. I mean, Penix, there are people that like rave about his personality, and frankly, as a fan that's watched him play his couple years here at Washington, he's like what you want. He's vanilla. Mm-hmm. He doesn't say anything out of line. He doesn't say anything too crazy either. I mean, Rome Odunze, he got asked at the combine, like he was asked that question. If a plane's going down, could you land it? And he kind of like jokingly, or maybe not jokingly, said, no, there's no way, every soul would perish. Well, that's pretty funny. Like, you can tell this guy he's thoughtful, he's creative, he's kind of witty. Penix would never say anything like that.
I think if you didn't know the contested catch number, if you didn't know that, and I hate this like overuse of this term, but if you didn't know that Rome Odunze was a dog, like a dude that's gonna fight for the ball, if you heard him talk, he's so cerebral. He's so like every answer is so thoughtful that you'd think like this guy, like kind of like when Myron Rolle or even Andrew Luck, one of those guys, like these guys where you're almost too smart to play football is what I think when I hear Rome. And I don't know what Rome Odunze's grades are. I don't know what major he took, but the way he talks about football, you're like, this is like it's truly one of the smartest guys I've heard talk about football.
It's the old school mentality of football where the expectation that a guy is going to run through a wall for you on game day, right? Like you always talk about running through a wall on game day. And in order to have that mentality, the perception is you kind of have to be dumb, right? Like you have to be dumb, super coachable, just do whatever anybody tells you. You're basically like a football android. And so when you hear these guys talk that are clearly intelligent, it can warp your perception because of the old school mentality of football. But that's a reality of the game. I mean, there are guys that are going to give you 100% every single time that are very smart. And this is just, they happen to be super talented too. So yeah, I mean, it is different with Rome, because I think he is, he can go a really long way just as an athlete, but when you combine that with his intelligence on top of that, I mean, that makes him a weapon for sure.
Yeah. The comparisons I heard on him that I thought were good. Again, these are like gonna be very good players, right? So like, don't shit your pants when I say them, but it's like Devontae Adams, Chris Carter, Larry Fitzgerald, which are like, I mean, Fitzgerald is like, obviously, I think Fitzgerald's at this point probably the best of those guys, but these are three guys who are Hall of Famers or future Hall of Famers, very likely Devontae Adams. Yeah. I think he's like got the physical traits and the mental traits to be there. Obviously, he's got to not get injured in his career. He's got to have a lot of things go right still. But barring injury, I think that dude is straight up a Hall of Famer.
Anytime you're dealing with not just the NFL draft, this is across all sports. Anytime you're dealing with prospects of any kind, they always get good comps, even if they're like not that good. Like even if you're talking like later round,
you're not going to get a comp of like here's like a fifth string guy that never did. Yeah, it's going to be like upside comps.
We need our analysts to dig a little bit deeper and be like, yeah, this love this guy here in the 7th round. Really reminds me of Rick Meirer. This guy right here, very much Dan McGuire. A lot of Dan McGuire in him. I want more of the bad.
I remember I had a
realistic comps.
I had a roommate who I'm not going to name, but he ended up being a somewhat accomplished journalist at a point, which you may be able to deduce yourself from who I'm talking about. He and I were talking. We're like I want to say it's like 2011. So the Sonics are like recently departed from Seattle, and I remember there was a player in the draft that kind of looked like Desmond Mason, and he goes, "This dude's like the next Desmond Mason." And I remember being like, "Is that straight off appearance to him?" And he's like, "Fuck, I think so." Dude, I was like, "Tell me what you know about his game." And it was like, and yeah, I kind of feel like that. I do think there's a lot of lazy comps out there. Those other guys, though, I mean, you're talking about like body control, guys that could make contested catches, guys that were very good athletes despite being very big. Okay, so I want to talk about the rest of the Huskies a lot more briefly than those two guys. I feel like, I mean, Penix has taken up a lot of the headlines because there's more like conflict on where he belongs in the draft. Adunze is such a great prospect. Like, and I'm also, there's two things I'm annoyed by with the Penix stuff that we can continue to talk about and especially hopefully if the Seahawks draft him at a good spot and we could talk about him for a decade. But this idea that because he played one bad game against Michigan, where he had no time to throw, where he was getting absolutely pelted, where he very clearly got injured and kept playing throughout the game, finished the game out. This is like a thing that also another thing about Penix, by the way, that they said, and the only person I heard actually report it was Michael Penix himself, so take it with that grain of salt, but was that the medicals came back pretty positive, which was one of the big concerns. But that dude played through injury, played through constant pressure, did not put up his best game, did not necessarily make adjustments. But to me, the thing is, how do we penalize Penix for what happened in that game, but not Ryan Grubb? You know what I mean?
Well, I was actually thinking about this with respect to Dylan Johnson, who also was injured in that game.
Sure.
Was injured in the previous game.
I feel like he's had a broken foot since he was about 3 years old.
Yeah. I think he's been broken for a while. Great season. Amazing season for Dylan Johnson as a running back. But Dylan Johnson's injury made the Huskies one-dimensional in that championship, and it ultimately ended up costing Michael Penix because he gets hurt in this game because he's just constantly under assault because the other team knows Dylan Johnson is injured, and because of that, the Huskies are one-dimensional. They can only throw the ball. And so, it's really interesting because among the Huskies that go to the Combine is Dylan Johnson, who is still recovering from the injury he suffered in the Sugar Bowl and then carried into the championship with him. And he goes out and runs, and he decides he's going to run the 40, which, there's a lot of guys that go to the Combine and are just not competing physically. They're there to just meet with teams and talk to people, and that's fine. He chose to run, and he runs a terrible time. I can't remember off the top of my head. It was like around the 4.7 mark, I believe.
Yeah, I believe that's
not
right.
good. Not good for a tailback.
4.68.
4.68. Very bad for a tailback. I just got to wonder, like, who is it? Like, sometimes you just wonder who's advising these guys. Like, because no agent in their right mind should be advising a guy who was injured, not quite 2 months ago, to go out and run a 40. And of course, after the fact, after this bad time, Dylan Johnson says, hey, I'm not 100%, but I wanted to show that I can run. Like, you don't have to prove that you have the dog in you.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to prove that. That'll come with time. You have to, the combine is all about proving that you are a specimen. That's all it is. Specimen, and that you can talk to people when you meet with them. So I found that very interesting, that first of all, his agent would even tell him to go out there and perform, or that he would choose on his own to perform. And that it ended up, becoming problematic in a way, because now this guy's probably not going to get drafted at all.
Yeah, I'll tell you my honest view of him was a guy who was probably like not even like a UDFA, priority UDFA type anyway. And I think I agree with you. I think he confirmed that. I don't think it's necessarily. I think if it was 1995, a guy with his profile, he might have gone from a second round prospect to a fifth round prospect. But the way the teams, there's probably not going to be a running back drafted until the late second round, maybe third round this year. Yeah. And it's going to keep getting worse for running backs. It's one of the earliest things we talked about on this podcast, is that position is just going away. As we know it, it's going away. Like fullbacks, it's going away. It's just, and that's just the reality. I want to talk about one more guy, because so like the other receivers, Jalen Polk and McMillan. God, why can't Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan? I was like, in my mind, I'm like, are they both Jalen, or am I fucking this up? Jalen spelled differently in both cases. I feel like Jalen, by the way, as a name, I know like a bunch of Jalens, and they're all like roughly those guys' age to about 30 right now. Every Jalen.
How do you know a bunch of guys that age? That's weird.
I've worked manual labor for a long time, buddy. That's okay. I've worked at places, manufacturing facilities. I know people. I'm not banging dudes.
Maybe
is that the question?
Five? No, I was just 5 to 10 years ago. Maybe you were like going to high school basketball games all the time.
So those guys were fine. Braylon Trice is interesting. Oh, by the way, Devin Culp had, I believe, the best tight end 40 time, which is not really what I expected.
Not only did he have the best tight end 40 time, he ran a 4.47. He had like one of the best times like across positions. I mean, he was amazingly fast. And he was never like at Washington. He was like an okay tight end, but he was never like this. I mean, he's just going to get drafted on his measurables alone. And then, did you see the picture of him that the NFL took and put out when he was running the 40? Oh my God. First of all, it's mid stride, so it looks like he's floating. But most of the time when they take these pictures of guys, their faces are just like all twisted up. They're really focused to run as fast as they possibly can. You got to look up the Devin Culp photo, because this guy looks as chill as can be. It looks like he's just out for a stroll, like a casual stroll. And it'd be one thing if like that time was like pretty average, right? You'd be like, well, that's why he looks so calm. But he ends up running this amazing time while looking as chill as can be. It's like, man, this guy might get drafted for a multitude of factors at this point. He's out here looking like a model, and he's putting up one of the best times we've seen at the combine.
I was trying to pull it up. Did you hear the video start playing in the background, by the way?
No, I did not.
Okay, good. That's good. That means the listeners didn't hear it either. Yeah, he'll be an interesting prospect, because he's but anyway, so and there's another guy I want to talk about, but Braylon Trice comes in, and my thought of Braylon Trice is that he was going to probably come in like 265 to 280, about in there, and be a guy who could and I brought up Michael Bennett earlier, but a guy who could like play across the defensive line, rotate through all positions of the defensive line in a 4-3, a guy who might be hand in the ground, sometimes on the edge as a rush linebacker, sometimes a very versatile guy who in the right scheme might be very dangerous. Did you see what he weighed in at? Because this didn't make enough news, I thought.
No, I did not.
245.
That's very undersized.
It's very undersized.
It probably means that Washington just reported him bigger, so that.
But I remember seeing him and like being like, "Damn, he looks like a defensive tackle, like a college defensive tackle," and then looking up his weight.
Well, he's been on a hunger strike, first of all. No, I don't know.
He wants a ceasefire in Gaza, and so Braylon Trice is.
He has not been eating. It's a bold choice ahead of the combine. No, I think, you see this a lot in sports where teams will over-report guys, whether it's height or weight, just size in general, to make them appear better than they might be. I heard of this, not as relevant, but I heard about this with minor league baseball. It's very interesting. Typically, over the past few years, baseball players have been much taller. They've been reported much taller than they actually are, which we know is a thing that happens.
Sure.
But in minor league baseball, that has suddenly been corrected, and guys have been shrinking at like record numbers because they have the automated strike zone in minor league baseball now. So you have to get your height exactly right so that you don't get cheated on the balls and strikes. Because if you want the robo-ump to call it correctly, you got to have the right height listed. So guys who were previously 5'10", 5'11" are now turning up 5'6", 5'7". And if they ever bring that robo-hump to Major League Baseball, which I kind of hope they do for many reasons, but one of the most fun would be just to see how some of these guys' heights just plummet as a result of this. So I can see how Washington might have reported him as being a little bit bigger than he was. Although if he truly was playing at 245 all year, then it just made what he did all season long even more remarkable.
Sure. Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious to see what that turns him into, because if he's 270 and he's putting up the numbers, the measurables that he put up, it's a little more impressive, obviously, than if he's 245. But there was one prospect, a guy who I'm going to call the DK Metcalf of the defense. I don't think he's going to get drafted as high as DK Metcalf got drafted, but there was a player named Tyler Owens, a safety from Texas Tech. So he comes out, he puts up a 41-inch vertical leap, a 12-foot 2-inch broad jump, which I'm not sure if that's true. I was reading about it earlier today. I believe they say that is 1 inch short of the world record for broad jump. This dude, then you read his scouting report, and he's got like top end speed, plays downhill, can cover like corners in the, a lot of this stuff that you're like, man, I really want all this stuff out of a safety. Goes to run the 40, pulls his groin, doesn't put up an official 40 time. And after that, obviously he doesn't do the workouts. He doesn't do any of the other measurable stuff after he injures himself. What made Tyler Owens noteworthy? You hear all this stuff about him and you're like, God, this is a guy the Seahawks should really be prioritizing. He gets interviewed before
I know
before he doesn't believe in space or other planets. He's not a flat earther, but he's not against the idea of a flat Earth. He, much like
he's like
me,
a no
by the
earther.
way, he's a no earther
where you just exist. I don't know.
Much like myself, he does not believe in the American moon landing, and this is a guy who I understand.
That's such a weird thing to hitch the wagon to, but yeah, I get it.
Yeah, one day we could talk about it, probably off the podcast, because for some reason I told this, my brother-in-law and I we share this, apart from sharing me an in-law relationship and him a biological relationship, we share some skepticism about the moon landing. We were talking to his parents about that, and they go, it sounds like you guys have like a real distrust of the government. And I was like, no, yeah, that's exactly right. You've perfectly diagnosed. I don't trust the government. Yes, exactly. Absolutely correct. Anyway, so here's what I'll say. Physical traits, seems like a guy you'd love to have on a football team. Some of the stuff, the conspiracy theory stuff, for a football team, you may not want him. But as two guys that host a podcast called Poor Sports, this seems like the kind of guy that we might be able to actually get to come on this podcast, first off, nutty enough to come on the podcast, but a guy that I want in front of a microphone every week representing this team.
I don't know if that's going to go well in Seattle. Just going to be honest with you. I mean, I didn't know all of his physical measurables that you just shared. They do sound very impressive. Maybe he jumps better because there's not a lot going on upstairs.
He's not subject to the gravity of a globe.
Yes, well, that's possible too. As a no earther, he's going to start a movement, the no Earth movement. I don't know if that one's going to catch on. The flat Earth movement, in and of itself, is obviously very niche. But
you've
no
heard the
Earth
birds are
is-
fake. I didn't know that the Earth was fake. That's surprising to find out.
No Earth, no space. I feel like space, when you're a kid, especially a young boy growing up, space is such a thing. Every boy, it's just like how little kids go through their boot phase. Kids also go through a space phase, right? Like there's all
Not
sorts
Tyler
of
Owens.
Not apparently not. I mean, it's whatever school system he was in. They need to go reevaluate.
He's from Plano, Texas. He's from a state that has launches. I think Plano's a suburb of Dallas, but they have launches.
I want to take you got to take him out to like one of the launch centers and just ask him like, where do you think these rockets go? No judgment. Just ask, where do you think they're going when they go up?
I think you get him to Seattle. You get him to be a spokesperson for the Museum of Flight. That's what I think you do.
I mean, I don't know if he's going to be able to conceive all of what's going on in there. Like, I don't know. Like, this man has obviously been on planes. Where do you think the plane is going? I don't know.
Straight across a flat surface.
Sometimes these people like this can be very interesting to talk to, but you get it like in small doses. If you get too much of it, you're like, man, this is insane. It's like we've already gotten tired of Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving is a little wacky, and then now it's to the point where when you do hear him talk, you're like, I don't believe a word this guy's saying.
The thing about Kyrie Irving is he fell into the inevitable trap of conspiracy theorists, which if you become a conspiracy theorist and you follow it to its logical end, eventually you hate the Jews. It just has to happen at the end of every conspiracy theory. Is somehow
that's
at the
how
end,
it goes. Huh?
Somehow at the end, those guys always hate the Jews. So Tyler Owens, please keep it together. Come to Seattle. Don't hate the Jews.
You got to pull back the conspiracy theory. You got to you really got to reel it in. Like
I say, ramp it up.
It's like when Carl Everett didn't believe in dinosaurs, right? Like he was just like, I don't believe in dinosaurs, and then he left it right there. That's all he said. Now he was a dick. People didn't like him because he was mean. He was just not a very nice guy, an easy guy to be around. But he kept the conspiracy theories to a minimum. You got to, if you pick one, you mention it once, you never mention it again. People can live with that. If you're Kyrie Irving and you're talking about it all the time, people are going to turn on you. So, best of luck to Tyler Owens. I hope it all works out for him, or not. If he really believes in these, then I hope it doesn't work out for him.
I'm glad he's just unearthing truths. Speaking of the dinosaurs, there's a comedian named Nate Bargatze you're probably familiar with, who, and there's another comedian, legendary but passed away, Patrice O'Neal. And one year, this is not my story, obviously, but one year Patrice O'Neal was having a barbecue. This is like a legendary story about Nate Bargatze and Patrice O'Neal. One year he's having a barbecue. Nate comes over. He starts talking to everybody about how he genuinely believes the Earth is only 6,000 years old, that dinosaurs aren't real. The next year, Patrice is having another barbecue, and one of Patrice's agent or something is like, "Hey, Nate, you made it really weird last year. Patrice doesn't want you at his barbecue." And then Patrice, that was like, "Where's Nate?" And he's like, "Well, I thought you wouldn't want him to come." He's like, "No, I want that motherfucker to come every year. I want to hear about that stuff every year." Like, that's kind of the way I feel about Tyler Owens.
Once a year. Yeah. If you hear about it once a year, you're like, it's entertaining.
I'll take it permanently. Get Tyler Owens to Seattle in some form.